Commander Jake Foster's boots echoed against the polished floor as he walked into the council chamber. He'd been to a lot of scary places in his career, fought in 3 border conflicts, survived a ship crash on an ice moon, but nothing compared to this moment. The chamber was massive, circular, rising up like the inside of a giant cone. And sitting all around him, on floating platforms that hung in the air like magic, were 12 of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. Jake was just a human. His species had only met aliens 50 years ago. 50 years might sound like a long time, but in galactic terms, humans were basically toddlers who just learned to walk. And here he was, standing trial in front of creatures whose civilizations were millions of years old. The hive-born counselor looked down at him from the highest platform. If you've ever seen a praying mantis, you'd have a rough idea of what they looked like, except 3 times the size of a human and covered in armor that looked like polished bronze. When they spoke, their voice came out through a translator device that made it sound cold and mechanical. Commander Foster, you stand accused of violating the sacred non-interference doctrine. How do you plead? Jake's throat was dry. His lawyer, some fancy diplomat from Earth, had told him to say as little as possible. Keep it simple. Plead guilty, throw yourself on the mercy of the court, hope they just kick humanity out of the galactic community instead of doing something worse. But Jake had never been good at keeping his mouth shut. I plead that I did what any decent person would do, he said. A ripple of movement went through the council. The Shardling counselor, a being that looked like a living crystal sculpture, tilted forward slightly. The deep-born counselor, floating in a tank of glowing liquid, bubbled in what might have been surprise or anger. Jake couldn't tell. That is not a recognized plea, the hive-born counselor said. Then I guess I plead guilty, Jake replied. But I'm not sorry. The chamber's lights dimmed, and suddenly a hologram appeared in the center of the room, floating right above Jake's head. It showed him on the mining colony of Kepler 442b, a miserable rock at the edge of explored space. In the hologram, Jake was younger, his uniform cleaner, his face less worn. And in his arms, pressed against his chest, was a small hive-born larva. The creature was maybe the size of a human infant, its shell pale and soft, not yet hardened into the bronze armor of adulthood. And it was shaking. Not just trembling, but shaking so hard that Jake in the hologram had to hold it tighter to keep it still. You could see Jake's jaw clenched, see the way his eyes kept darting to something off-screen, see the fear written all over his face. This footage was recovered from your ship's external cameras, the hive-born counselor said. It shows you in clear violation of our cultural sovereignty. That larva had not yet undergone the naming ceremony. By our law, by our ancient tradition, it was not yet a person. It had no rights. No protection. And you had no authority to interfere. Jake watched the hologram. He remembered that day like it was burned into his brain. He remembered the weight of the larva in his arms, the way its shell felt smooth and cold at first, then slowly warmed against his body heat. He remembered the clicking sounds it made, desperate little noises that didn't need translation. The colony was being evacuated, the prosecutor continued. A reactor malfunction. Standard procedure. All legal persons were removed to safety. The unlawfully abandoned larvae were determined to be acceptable losses by the colony administrator. This is within hive-born law. This is our right as a sovereign species. Acceptable losses, Jake repeated, his voice flat. That's what you called them. That is what they were, the hive-born counselor said. 17 larvae had not yet been named. 17 shells that would either prove strong enough to survive the emergency, or would perish as the weak always do. This is the foundation of our culture. The strong survive. The weak do not. It has made us what we are for 100,000 years. Jake looked up at the counselor. How many of those 17 larvae would have survived a reactor meltdown? Silence. I asked you a question, Jake pressed. How many? That is irrelevant, the counselor said. No, it's pretty damn relevant, Jake shot back. Because we both know the answer is 0. You didn't leave them there to see if they were strong. You left them there to die. There's a difference. The human diplomat behind Jake made a strangled sound, probably trying to signal him to shut up. Jake ignored him. He was already this deep. Might as well go all the way. You want to know what I did? Jake continued. Fine. I'll tell you exactly what happened. Every detail. Every choice. And then you can decide if following orders, if respecting your laws, if leaving children to burn alive in a reactor explosion is really the kind of civilization you want to be. The hive-born counselor's mandibles clicked together in what Jake had learned was anger. You will show respect to this council. I'll show respect when this council earns it, Jake said. Now do you want to hear my story or not? Another long silence. Then the eldest counselor, the shardling who'd sat motionless this entire time, spoke for the first time. Her voice sounded like wind chimes, musical and strange. Let him speak, she said. I wish to hear what drove a human to risk everything for creatures he'd never met. Jake took a deep breath. This was it. His one chance to make them understand. His one chance to explain why he'd broken their most sacred law. His one chance to save not just himself, but maybe change something fundamental about how this galaxy worked. 3 weeks ago, Jake began, my ship received a distress call. The distress call came through at 0300 hours, which meant Jake and his crew were dead asleep when the alarm started screaming through the ship. His second officer, Lieutenant Amy Brooks, was the first one on the bridge, still wearing her sleeping shirt with coffee stains on it. That's the thing about space emergencies, they don't wait for you to look professional. What have we got? Jake asked, sliding into his captain's chair. Mining colony on Kepler 442b, sir. Reactors going critical. They're calling for any nearby ships to assist with evacuation. Amy pulled up the colony specs on the main screen. Population of about 200. Mostly hive-born. We're the closest ship, about 40 minutes out if we push the engines. Jake nodded. 40 minutes. That was tight, but doable. Set course, maximum burn. Wake up the crew. The trip to Kepler 442b felt longer than 40 minutes. Jake spent most of it reading reports about hive-born colonies, trying to understand what they'd be walking into. He'd worked with hive-born before, even had a few as crew members over the years. They were efficient, logical, and followed rules like their lives depended on it. Which, in space, they often did. What Jake didn't know much about was their culture. The deep stuff. The religious stuff. That was about to become a problem. When they arrived at the colony, it was chaos. Ships were launching from every docking port, packed with hive-born adults, all scrambling to get away before the reactor blew. Jake tried to hail the colony administrator 3 times before someone finally answered. Human vessel, we appreciate your response but we have sufficient evacuation capacity. You may depart. The hive-born on the screen looked stressed, their mandibles clicking rapidly. You sure? Jake asked. We've got room for at least 50 more if you need it. Negative. All persons are accounted for. Safe travels, Commander. The transmission cut off. Jake frowned. Something felt wrong. Amy, scan the colony. Full life sign sweep. Amy's fingers danced across her console. Then she stopped. Sir, I'm picking up multiple life signs still in the colony. Looks like they're concentrated in one area. Reads as hive-born biology, but smaller. A lot smaller. How many? 17, sir. Jake felt his stomach drop. Hail them again. Now. This time a different hive-born appeared on screen, one with more elaborate markings on their shell. An administrator, maybe someone important. Commander Foster, I told you all persons are evacuated. Please clear the area, you have 16 minutes before reactor breach. I'm reading 17 life signs still in the colony, Jake said, keeping his voice level. Southeast section, looks like a residential area. The administrator's expression didn't change. If anything, they looked annoyed. Those are not persons, Commander. Those are larvae. Unnamed. They have not yet undergone the naming ceremony. By our law, they do not exist as legal entities. Jake stared at the screen. You're leaving kids behind? I am following our cultural and religious traditions, which predate your species by millennia, the administrator said coldly. The larvae that survive this trial will be strong. The ones that do not were not meant to continue. This is our way. Now please, depart before you violate the non-interference doctrine. The screen went black. Jake sat there for a moment, his mind racing. 16 minutes. 17 kids. No, larvae. Whatever the hell they were called. He looked at Amy, who was staring at him with wide eyes. Sir, we can't, she said quietly. The non-interference doctrine is absolute. We impose our values on their culture, and Earth loses its seat in the galactic community. We could start a war. They're kids, Amy. They're not, sir. Not legally. Not by hive-born law. Amy's voice was shaking. I know how this sounds. I know how this feels. But we have our orders. We have treaties. We have laws that exist for good reasons. Jake pulled up the external cameras, switching to a view of the colony. He could see it now, a separate building apart from the main structures. The hatchery. Through the windows, he could make out movement. Small shapes huddled together in the darkness. "How long until we have to leave to clear the blast radius?" he asked. 14 minutes, sir." Jake did the math in his head. 14 minutes to get down there, grab 17 larvae, get back to the ship, and get far enough away that they wouldn't all die in the explosion. It was insane. It was impossible. And even if he could do it, he'd be violating the most sacred law in galactic civilization. His career would be over. Earth might be kicked out of the galactic community. His crew could face charges. Everything humanity had worked for over the past 50 years, all the diplomacy and careful relationship building, it could all fall apart because of him. "Lieutenant Brooks," Jake said, standing up. "You have command. Get the ship to minimum safe distance." "Sir, what are you doing?" "What I should have done the moment we got here," Jake said, heading for the airlock. "Prep the emergency transport. I'm going down there." "Commander, I cannot allow you to do this," Amy said, but her voice had no strength behind it. They both knew she couldn't actually stop him. "Court-martial me later," Jake said. "Right now, I need an EVA suit and a transport pod." 13 minutes, Amy. The trip down to the colony took 3 minutes. The transport pod wasn't designed for speed, and every second felt like an hour. Jake kept checking the timer on his wrist display. 10 minutes. 9 minutes. The numbers ticking down like a countdown to the end of the world. He crashed the pod through the hatchery's emergency entrance, which was already damaged from the failing systems. The moment he stepped inside, he understood why the larvae had been left behind. The temperature was dropping fast. Life support was failing. And these weren't hardened adult hive-born with thick shells and the ability to survive harsh conditions. These were babies, essentially. Their shells were soft, translucent, vulnerable. They scattered when they saw him, terrified of this strange alien creature that had just burst into their world. Jake didn't blame them. He probably looked like a monster to them. But he didn't have time to be gentle. "Come on," he said, knowing they couldn't understand him. "We gotta go. Now." He reached for the nearest larva, and it skittered away, clicking in distress. Jake tried again with another one. Same result. They were too scared, and he was too alien, and there wasn't enough time to earn their trust. 7 minutes. That's when Jake saw it. One larva, smaller than the others, wasn't moving. It sat in the corner, its shell pale, almost white instead of the bronze color it should have been. And it was shaking. Not from fear. From cold. Jake crossed the room in 3 long strides, yanked off his jacket, and scooped up the small creature. It didn't resist, didn't try to run. It just curled against his chest, seeking any warmth it could find. The moment Jake touched it, everything changed. The other larvae stopped running. They watched as this alien creature, this human, wrapped one of their own in fabric and held it close. Maybe they understood something in that gesture. Maybe they just recognized gentleness when they saw it. Jake looked at his wrist display. 6 minutes. "Okay," he said to the larvae watching him. "Your choice. Stay here and die, or trust the scary alien. What's it gonna be?" One by one, they started moving toward him. Jake ran through the failing colony with the small larva pressed against his chest, feeling its shell gradually warm against his body heat. Behind him, 11 other larvae followed, their tiny legs clicking against the metal floor in a rhythm that sounded like rainfall. They trusted him now, but trust wasn't going to be enough. Not with 5 minutes left on the clock. His communicator crackled to life. "Commander, this is Brooks. We're detecting multiple life signs converging on your position. Please tell me that's you with the larvae." "That's me," Jake panted, sprinting toward the transport pod. "Get the ship ready for immediate departure. We're gonna be cutting this close." "Sir, we have a problem." Amy's voice had that tone, the one that meant things were about to get complicated. "The crew disobeyed my orders. They took the other transport pods down to help you. They've got 11 larvae. You've got 1. That's 12 total." Jake slid to a stop outside the transport pod, his boots squealing on the floor. "You said 17 life signs." "Yes, sir. 17 larvae. 12 accounted for. That leaves 5 still in the colony. 4 minutes and 30 seconds until reactor breach." Jake looked down at the larva in his arms. Its shell had stopped shaking. It was clicking softly now, a sound that almost seemed content. Then he looked back toward the darkened corridors of the dying colony. 5 more kids back there. 5 more chances at life. Where are they? Jake asked. Scattered, sir. 2 in the eastern dormitory, 3 in what looks like a medical facility. Commander, you don't have time. If you go back for them, you won't make it out. Jake was already moving. Get the crew back to the ship with the 12 they've got. I'll get the rest. Sir, that's suicide. That's an order, Lieutenant. He found the first 2 larvae huddled in a storage closet in the dormitory, probably hiding when the chaos started. They saw Jake and immediately started clicking in distress, backing away from him. But then the larva in Jake's arms clicked back at them, a different sound, and somehow that made all the difference. The 2 larvae approached cautiously, then followed Jake as he ran. 3 minutes, 15 seconds. The medical facility was on the other side of the colony. Jake's lungs were burning, his legs felt like lead, but he pushed harder. The larva in his arms had started to feel heavy, or maybe Jake was just getting tired. Didn't matter. 3 more kids to go. He burst into the medical facility and found the 3 larvae immediately. They were in some kind of observation tank, trapped behind a transparent barrier. The door controls were fried, sparking and useless. Jake looked around frantically for something, anything he could use. 2 minutes, 4 to 5 seconds. Amy, I need you to override the door controls in the medical facility. Remote access, now. Sir, those systems are fried. I can't get a signal through. Jake looked at the barrier, then at his sidearm. It was rated for hull breaches, designed to punch through metal in emergency situations. It would either break the barrier or cause a catastrophic failure that would kill them all. Great odds. He fired 3 shots. The barrier spiderwebbed, held for a heartbeat, then shattered. The 3 larvae tumbled out, clicking in fear and confusion. Jake scooped up 2 of them, 1 under each arm, still cradling the small one against his chest. The 3rd larva grabbed onto his leg, clinging there like its life depended on it. 2 minutes, 10 seconds. Running with 1 larva was hard. Running with 5 was impossible. Jake made it maybe 50 feet before he stumbled, nearly dropping all of them. His vision was going dark at the edges, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might explode. The transport pod was still 100 yards away. He wasn't going to make it. That's when he heard the engines. 3 transport pods came screaming around the corner, and Jake had never been so happy to see his crew disobey orders in his entire life. The pods landed in a triangle formation around him, and crew members poured out. Grab them and go. Jake shouted. His engineer, a kid named Tyler who couldn't have been more than 23, took 2 larvae. His medical officer, Rodriguez, grabbed 2 more. Jake kept the small one, the one that had stopped shaking, the one that had somehow convinced the others to trust him. 1 minute, 30 seconds. They made it to the pods with seconds to spare. Jake's pod lifted off just as the corridor behind them collapsed, the colony structure beginning to tear itself apart. Through the viewport, he could see his ship in the distance, engines already hot, ready to run. All pods accounted for, Amy's voice came through, tight with stress. Docking now. 17 larvae, all alive. Commander, you need to see something. What? Jake asked, watching the colony shrink behind them as they accelerated away. The weight, sir. We're 40% over maximum safe capacity. The engines can't generate enough thrust to clear the blast radius in time. We're going to be too slow. Jake felt the pod clamp onto the ship's hull, felt the familiar shudder as they docked. He carried the small larva through the airlock, into the cargo bay where his crew had gathered with all 17 larvae. They looked at him, waiting for orders, waiting for him to pull off another miracle. How much time? He asked. 90 seconds to reactor breach. We need at least 2 minutes to clear minimum safe distance at our current acceleration. Jake looked around the cargo bay. It was packed with supplies, emergency rations, water recycling equipment, medical supplies, spare parts, everything a ship needed for long-range operations. Months of supplies. Years, if they rationed carefully. Jettison everything, Jake said. Sir. Tyler looked confused. Everything that's not bolted down and isn't necessary for immediate life support. Food, water, medical supplies, spare parts, all of it. Out the airlock. Now. Rodriguez stepped forward. Commander, if we jettison our supplies, we won't have enough to make it back to the nearest station. We'll be adrift. We'll starve before anyone reaches us. Maybe, Jake said. But if we don't lose the weight, we'll all die in about 80 seconds. So let's worry about starving later. Move. The crew erupted into action. The cargo bay doors opened to space, and they started pushing everything out. Crates of food tumbling into the void. Water containers spinning away into darkness. Medical equipment that cost more than Jake's annual salary, just gone. The larvae watched with their strange compound eyes, not understanding what was happening but sensing the urgency. 30 seconds. Amy called from the bridge. Keep going. Jake shouted, shoving a massive crate of spare engine parts toward the airlock. Tyler was beside him, both of them pushing, muscles screaming. 15 seconds. Commander, we need to close those doors and burn now, or we're all dead. The last crate tumbled out. Close it. All hands, brace for maximum acceleration. Jake grabbed the small larva and held it tight, wrapping his body around it protectively. Around him, his crew did the same with the other larvae, forming human shields with their own bodies. The cargo bay doors slammed shut. The engines roared to life, pushing far beyond their safe limits. And then the colony exploded. The shockwave hit them like a giant fist, sending the ship tumbling. Alarm screamed. Something sparked and exploded near Jake's head. He curled tighter around the larva, protecting it from debris. The ship spun wildly, out of control, and for a moment Jake was certain they were all going to die anyway. Then the stabilizers kicked in. The spinning slowed, stopped. The alarms went quiet one by one. And Jake uncurled himself to find the small larva in his arms, still clicking softly, still alive. Damage report, he croaked. Hull integrity at 85%, Amy's voice came through, shaking but professional. Life support functional. Engines overstressed but operational. We're alive, sir. Everyone's alive. Jake looked around the cargo bay. His crew was scattered across the floor, bruised and bleeding and exhausted. The larvae were huddled together, clicking to each other in what might have been comfort or fear or relief. And outside the viewport, where the colony had been, there was just an expanding cloud of debris. How long until we reach the nearest station? Jake asked quietly. 12 days at best speed, sir. Amy paused. Our remaining supplies will last maybe 3 days. 4 if we ration hard. 3 days of food. 12 days of travel. The math wasn't complicated. They'd saved 17 lives, and in doing so, they'd probably doomed themselves. The small larva in Jake's arms clicked again, nuzzling against his chest. Still seeking warmth. Still trusting him to keep it safe. Worth it, Jake whispered. Then his communicator chirped. A new signal, incoming. Amy's voice was confused. Sir, we're being hailed. Multiple ships. They're hive-born. And they're not here to rescue us. Jake finished telling his story, and the council chamber fell into a heavy silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, makes it hard to breathe. He could feel every eye on him, human and alien alike. The hologram of the colony explosion still flickered above his head, frozen on the moment of impact. The hive-born counselor was the first to break the silence, and when they spoke, their voice was cold enough to freeze water. You have confessed to willfully violating our sovereignty. You have admitted to imposing your cultural values on our species. You have destroyed months of supplies and endangered your crew, all for creatures that were not legally recognized as persons under our law. Yeah, Jake said simply. That's exactly what I did. Then you leave this council no choice. We demand the maximum penalty. Execution, and immediate expulsion of humanity from the galactic community. A murmur went through the chamber. Jake's lawyer, the fancy diplomat from Earth, looked like he was about to pass out. But Jake just stood there, arms crossed, meeting the hive-born counselor's gaze without flinching. Before you vote, a new voice said, I would like to ask the commander a question. Everyone turned to look at the Shardling counselor. She was ancient, her crystalline body bearing the marks of billions of years. She rarely spoke during trials, hadn't said more than a handful of words in the past 1,000 years according to records. But now she leaned forward, her facets catching the light and throwing rainbows across the chamber floor. Commander Foster, which larva did you hold? Which one did you carry against your chest while the others followed behind? Jake felt his jaw tighten. He'd known this question would come eventually. Does it matter? It matters very much, the Shardling said. The Hive-born have made it clear that these larvae are now legally recognized persons. They have undergone their naming ceremony. They exist in the eyes of their law. So I ask again, which one did you save first? Which one was most important to you? They were all equally important, Jake said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got, Jake shot back. I didn't pick favorites. I grabbed the first one I could reach, the one that was too cold to run away, and I held onto it because it needed help. The others followed because they chose to. I would have done the same for any of them. The hive-born counselor made a harsh clicking sound. This is irrelevant. The question of which specific larva is meaningless. They were all illegal salvage at the time of recovery. Illegal salvage. A new voice cut through the chamber, sharp and angry. Lieutenant Amy Brooks stood up from the witness area, ignoring the diplomat frantically trying to pull her back down. You're calling children illegal salvage. Lieutenant, you are out of order, the council administrator began, but Amy wasn't stopping. No, what's out of order is this entire proceeding, Amy said, walking toward the center of the chamber. You want to put Commander Foster on trial? Fine. But let's talk about what's really happening here. Let's talk about the other 16 colonies this year where hive-born larvae were abandoned. The chamber erupted. Several counselors started speaking at once. The hive-born counselor stood up, mandibles clicking furiously. Those are internal matters. Cultural practices protected under the non-interference doctrine. Protected. Amy pulled out a datapad, her hands shaking but her voice steady. I spent the last 3 weeks going through public records. 16 colonies. 93 larvae left behind. Not because they were weak. Not because of some sacred natural selection process. Let me read you something. She swiped through the datapad. Colony Administrator's Log, Mining Station Theta 7. The larvae from the Westonhouse bloodline have been designated as non-essential. Their families have fallen out of favor with the matriarchs. Standard procedure will be followed during the evacuation. That's a direct quote. Another swipe. Colony Administrator's Log, Research Outpost Kepler 186F. The lower caste larvae will not be included in the evacuation manifest. Resources must be preserved for bloodlines of value. Another direct quote. Amy looked up at the hive-born counselor. You're not practicing natural selection. You're practicing eugenics. You're murdering children from families you don't like and calling it culture. The hive-born counselor's shell was actually shaking now. You have no right to judge our traditions. Your species has existed for mere moments in galactic time. We have maintained social order for 100,000 years through these practices. Social order, Amy repeated bitterly. Is that what you call it when you leave babies to die? Another counselor spoke up, one Jake hadn't heard from before. The deep-born, floating in their tank of luminescent liquid, their voice bubbling through their translator. The human raises an interesting point. The non-interference doctrine was established to protect cultural diversity. But perhaps it is time to ask what we are protecting. We're protecting sovereignty, the hive-born counselor snapped. The right of each species to govern itself without outside interference. Even when that governance involves atrocity, the deep-born asked quietly. It's not atrocity, it's tradition. Those words are not mutually exclusive, the Shardling counselor said, and the weight of her billions of years made everyone pause. I have seen many civilizations rise and fall. I have watched species destroy themselves and others in the name of tradition. And I have learned one truth above all others. The traditions we refuse to question are often the ones that need questioning most. She turned her crystalline gaze to the hive-born counselor. For 100,000 years, you have abandoned your young and called it strength. But I ask you this. If it is truly natural selection, why do you only abandon larvae from certain bloodlines? Why do the children of the powerful always survive these selections, while the children of the powerless always perish? That is an oversimplification of a complex cultural practice, the hive-born counselor said, but their voice had lost some of its certainty. Is it? The Shardling pressed. Then explain it to me. Explain how selecting for political loyalty is the same as selecting for biological fitness. The hive-born counselor had no answer. Jake watched this all unfold, feeling something shift in the chamber. The other counselors were looking at each other, having silent conversations with glances and subtle movements. The deep-born was bubbling more rapidly, which Jake had learned meant they were thinking hard about something. Even the insectoid counselor from the Vex species, who usually stayed neutral in everything, was leaning forward with interest. There's something else, Amy said, and now her voice was quieter, more careful. The 17 larvae that Commander Foster saved. They've petitioned to testify. They're outside the chamber right now, waiting for permission to speak. The hive-born counselor spun to face her. Absolutely not. They are juveniles. Their testimony is inadmissible under council rules. Jake couldn't help himself. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. That's funny. You didn't consider them juveniles when you left them to burn. They were not legally persons at that time. Then they couldn't have been juveniles either, Jake said. So which is it? Were they persons with rights, or were they not? Because you can't have it both ways. The hive-born counselor's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. They had no response, because there was no response. The logic was circular, and everyone in the chamber could see it. The Shardling counselor spoke again. I move that we hear from the larvae. They are now recognized as legal persons under hive-born law. They have a right to speak about events that directly affected their lives. All in favor? One by one, the counselors voted. Not all of them, not even most of them. But enough. Enough to override the hive-born counselor's objection. Enough to open the doors. The 17 larvae entered the chamber, and Jake felt his breath catch. He hadn't seen them in 3 weeks, not since they'd been taken into hive-born custody. They'd grown. Their shells had hardened into the proper bronze color, their bodies nearly adult-sized now. They moved with confidence, their legs clicking in perfect synchronization. But the smallest one, the one Jake had held against his chest, still walked differently. Its shell was still paler than the others, its movements slower, more careful. It reached the center of the chamber and turned to face the council. When it spoke, its voice was soft but clear through the translator. My name is Keeper. And I would like to tell you what we remember from the day we should have died. Keeper stood in the center of the council chamber, and despite being the smallest of the 17 larvae, somehow they commanded everyone's attention. The other 16 stood behind them in a perfect formation, their shells gleaming under the chamber lights. Jake couldn't take his eyes off Keeper. The little larva that had been shaking from cold, barely clinging to life, was now standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. I remember the cold, Keeper began, their voice quiet but steady through the translator. That's the first thing I remember clearly. The adults were running, shouting, grabbing things. I remember asking my clutch mother what was happening. She didn't answer. She just kept running. The hive-born counselor shifted uncomfortably on their platform, but said nothing. We were in the hatchery when the alarm started. 17 of us. We'd been taught that when danger comes, we wait for the adults to protect us. That's what the clutch mothers always said. Wait, be patient, trust the process. So we waited. Keeper paused, their shell catching the light. We waited while they sealed the doors. We waited while they boarded the ships. We waited while the temperature dropped and the light started failing. We kept waiting because that's what we were taught to do. One of the other larvae stepped forward, slightly larger than Keeper, with distinctive markings on its shell. My name is Builder. I was the oldest in the hatchery. When the cold got worse, the younger ones looked to me for guidance. I told them what I'd been taught. That this was a test. That the strong would survive and the weak would fall away, and this was the natural order of things. Builder's voice cracked slightly. I believed that. I truly believed we were being tested, and that if we were strong enough, someone would come back for us. I didn't realize until much later that no one was coming. That we weren't being tested. We were being eliminated. The chamber was silent. Even the hive-born counselor seemed frozen, unable to speak. A third larva moved forward. My name is Scholar. I come from the Eastern House, a bloodline that has served in scientific research for 6 generations. My clutch father is a renowned physicist. My clutch mother designed the colony's life support systems. When the evacuation began, I saw her at the control panel. She looked toward the hatchery. I saw her face. She knew we were there. Scholar's voice turned harder. She made a choice. She sealed the hatchery doors to preserve power for the adult sections. She prioritized the evacuation of political leaders over the lives of her own offspring. And under our law, this was acceptable. Under our law, this was correct. Jake watched the hive-born counselor, saw the way their mandibles were trembling. He'd seen that before, in hive-born crew members. It was shame. They were feeling shame. Keeper spoke again. When the human came through the door, I didn't understand what I was seeing. We'd been taught that aliens were dangerous, that humans especially were unpredictable and violent. But then I saw what he was doing. He was removing his own protective covering. He was taking off the thing that kept him warm, even though he needed it, because he saw that I was cold. The small larva moved closer to where Jake stood. I felt him wrap me in his covering. I felt his warmth. And I understood something that no clutch mother had ever taught me. I understood that strength isn't about surviving alone. Strength is about choosing to protect someone weaker than yourself, even when it costs you something. Jake felt his throat tighten. He hadn't cried in years, not since his father's funeral, but he felt dangerously close to it now. The other humans came, Builder said. They disobeyed their own leader's orders to help save us. They risked court-martial, risked their careers, risked their lives. For us. 4 larvae they'd never met, from a species that wasn't even their own. And when their ship couldn't escape, Scholar continued, when the weight of saving all of us meant they would die in the explosion, do you know what they did? They threw away everything they needed to survive. Their food. Their water. Their medical supplies. Everything. They chose to starve slowly rather than let us die quickly. Keeper turned to face the hive-born counselor directly. So I have a question for you, counselor. You say that leaving us behind was about strength, about natural selection, about maintaining the purity of our species. But I ask you this. Who showed more strength that day? The adults who ran and sealed us inside? Or the humans who ran toward danger to pull us out? The hive-born counselor opened their mandibles to speak, but no sound came out. I'll answer for you, Keeper said. The humans showed strength. Real strength. The kind that doesn't abandon the weak. The kind that doesn't justify cruelty by calling it tradition. The kind that says every life has value, not just the ones that are politically convenient. Another larva stepped forward, one Jake didn't remember as clearly from that day. My name is Voice. I come from the Western House bloodline. My family has been in decline for 3 generations. We are considered lower caste now. That's why I was in that hatchery. That's why I wasn't named yet. Because if I died before the naming ceremony, it wouldn't matter. My death wouldn't count against anyone's record. It would just be natural selection. Voice's shell was shaking now, not from cold but from anger. Except it wasn't natural. It was political. It was murder dressed up in religious language. And everyone knew it. The administrators knew it. The clutch mothers knew it. Even some of the other larvae knew it. But no one said anything, because that's not how our culture works. The shardling counselor leaned forward, her ancient voice gentle. What would you have us do, young ones? How do we address something that has been practiced for 100,000 years? Keeper looked up at her, and Jake saw something in that small larva that reminded him of every brave person he'd ever served with. You call it what it is. You stop pretending that tradition justifies cruelty. You stop hiding behind the non-interference doctrine when that doctrine is being used to protect atrocity. The chamber erupted. 3 counselors stood up immediately, declaring their resignation from the proceedings. 2 more started arguing loudly for immediate reform of the non-interference doctrine. The hive-born counselor was clicking frantically, trying to maintain control, but it was too late. The silence had been broken. Jake just stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe this wouldn't change everything. Maybe the galaxy would keep spinning the way it always had. But maybe, just maybe, 17 larvae speaking truth to power would make some small difference. The shardling counselor raised one crystalline arm, and somehow that simple gesture quieted the chamber. Everyone turned to look at her, waiting for the ancient being to speak. I have lived for billions of years, she said slowly. I have seen civilizations rise from nothing and collapse into dust. I have watched species make the same mistakes over and over, generation after generation. And I have learned that true change rarely comes from the old and powerful. It comes from the young and courageous. She looked at Keeper, at all 17 larvae, and then at Jake. In all my existence, I have never seen a species so willing to sacrifice for those who were not their own. I have never seen someone hold what they feared, simply to keep it warm. And I have never seen children speak truth when adults would not. The shardling turned to the other counselors. I abstain from judgment on Commander Foster's guilt or innocence. That is not my place to decide. But I will say this. We have built our galactic civilization on the principle that all cultures deserve respect. But perhaps we have been too focused on respecting traditions, and not focused enough on respecting lives. The vote came quickly after that. Not unanimous, not even close. But enough. Jake was acquitted on a technicality that made the lawyers happy and changed nothing about what had actually happened. The hive-born counselor was removed from their position pending investigation into the colony abandonment practices. And the non-interference doctrine was officially under review for the first time in recorded history. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to enough. But it was something. As Jake left the council chamber, Keeper approached him. The small larva looked up at the human who'd saved them, and reached out with one delicate leg to touch Jake's hand. I'm bonded to you, Keeper said quietly. That's what happened when you held me. It's a biological response in our species. When we're young and vulnerable, we bond to whoever protects us. It can't be undone. Jake knelt down so he was at eye level with Keeper. Is that a problem? It means I can't stay with my people, Keeper said. I'll need to be near you. It's not a choice. It's biology. Jake smiled, the first real smile he'd had in weeks. Then I guess you're coming home with me. Hope you like Earth. It's warmer than that colony, I promise you that. Keeper's shell seemed to brighten slightly. They watched without a word when we were left behind. But you spoke with your actions. You showed us what words should mean when they are backed up by something real. They walked out of the council chamber together, the human commander and the small alien he'd refused to abandon. Behind them, the galaxy was starting to ask questions it had avoided for millennia. Ahead of them, whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, Jake just held his hand out. And Keeper took it, their small leg wrapping around his finger, still seeking warmth from the person who'd given it when no one else would. Some bonds, Jake thought, are stronger than laws. Stronger than culture. Stronger than fear. Some bonds are formed in the cold, when someone chooses to hold you close and refuse to let go.